Good morning, everyone. This is strange, isn't it? Getting back to all of this. I think it's become a bit of a cliche now. People say, "Oh, it's really lovely to be back in front of people," but truly for me, this is very different because it's the first time I've done any public speaking for about 3 years, which is a bit strange, and weirdly twinned with going back to doing wedding singing on the Saturday. So it really does feel like it's back. Yeah, just a quick thank you as well for Scott and the team. This is like amazing, really is quite amazing. And you know, to perhaps sort of play that down a little bit. If anyone's watched the Drive to Survive or Driving to Survive Netflix thing, right? Yeah, we watched that and thought they had a few sort of video calls and things within that series. And when I knew I was coming to talk to you today here, I was thinking, well, actually, that's quite a grand place. This is gonna attack my imposter complex, something chronic, but yeah, it's really nice to be here, and it's really nice to be back. So yeah, good. Anyway, like, I ought to get on with talking about what I'm talking about, which is to start with about triangle networks. So, to many of you won't know us, and in certain parts of the country, people do, but you may have met Stuart, my compadre over there, who's here. We've actually a bit of a startup in Milton Keynes, really, throughout the lockdown, and I'll come on to why. But for the last 20 years almost, we were established in 2004. We've been a business-to-business internet service provider, but we actually started life as a voice over IP company. So we were developing Astra system, front ends and various other things. So we're very much in that kind of space. But for years, we realized our customer was an SME business, and they were trying to run critical applications, voice applications. They were reliant on those telephone calls coming in. It's slightly different now. Of course, we're using, bots and chat systems and various other things, and email, of course. But back in 2004, people still wanted to have that telephone ringing, and that was the primary form of communication. And we found that we were just being let down constantly by inadequate connectivity, by copper connectivity. And right way through this journey, we were talking, these meetings and saying, look, this just isn't good enough. We really need to get cracking with this. We need to get rid of this copper. We need to legalize copper theft. Then it'll all disappear overnight. But we thought the only way to do that really is to really support those SME businesses in trying to find solutions for connectivity. And unfortunately, the best we had was standard broadband that was provided by Openreach or Virgin or whatever. And there really is nothing against those guys because they've done some great stuff, particularly recently. But that was our only option. So sort of fast forwarding to, I suppose, to 2012-ish, I suppose, when Microsoft got rid of the small business server and everything started to become a bit more cloud, we started to see a bit of a shift. So come 2016, we were getting a call from CityFibre saying, look, we've got this opportunity to launch a network. We've bought this huge network. Would you be interested? So we very quickly shifted from being a telecoms company, very much from Triangle Telecom into Triangle Networks. And our goal, and it still remains to this day, is to provide connectivity, great connectivity, world-class connectivity to IT companies particularly, but property businesses in a sort of wires-only kind of way. But the secret to all this for us is to really support those guys in understanding what they're doing and how we can drive that forward. So we spent the last, since 2016, becoming a social answer, the analog answer to a digital problem. So we would do invites. We would bring businesses out of their offices at 5 o'clock. We'd go and have a drink or a coffee morning, whatever it might be. And we do that because we knew that the small business, they don't engage in the way that we as technologists like to engage. Often the small businesses, it might be an estate agent, let's say, or a small law firm or something. Their understanding or their experience of connectivity and experience of digital is a real challenge. So it's sort of our job. I see it as our job to help them on that journey. And we've been talking about digital transformation for years and years and years. Yeah. In fact, I recall a particular conversation I had with a local authority, a head of economic development. I won't say where because that'd be terrible for him. And he said, actually, what do you think digital transformation actually is? And I was like, well, I think it's about productivity and efficiency. But at that point, before the pandemic, no one really got it. No one really thought, okay, I really understand what this is. Well, you're probably familiar with that logo, being Milton Keynes. You probably don't know that you were the first place to be finished in the CityFibre arena. I don't know if they could necessarily say it's completely finished, but. And why then are we so bothered about this digital transformation? Why is it so important? And why is it so important for the small businesses as well as the large businesses to get involved with it? Well, it's not necessarily to be like these guys. Actually, as it happens, a couple of them have been customers of ours. But what's really important is for the small businesses not to feel threatened and feel the fear of losing out to others. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was talking to a business improvement district bunch of guys, and the retailers were saying, "Look, we're lost. We're going to lose out to Amazon. Amazon's going to have our lunch. We've got we can't do this. We can't compete with Amazon." And one of the things I said to them at the time was, "Look, you don't have to be Amazon to compete with them. You've got something very different. It's about relationship building. What you've got to do is use digital technology to do that." And then, to give some context, it's a small town a small village I live in, really, but it's 250 businesses out of the 400 businesses in the entire area are retailers. So it's a huge number of the businesses that now need to really transform and really drive forward innovation, not least of all because a lot of them are innovators in their own right, but also because they're the ones that are going to get left behind. We end up with a hollowed out town centre because the retailers haven't kept up. They haven't kept up because they deal with things in a very social way, and what we want to do is support them to understand what innovation and digital transformation means. Otherwise, ultimately, the purple bricks one's a great example, right? The estate agents have in no small part lost out to online stuff, and Uber, of course, is a big part of that as well. So, right, okay, well, now comes the real story. So, beginning of the pandemic and why we came here in the first place. So, at the beginning of the pandemic, before the pandemic, we'd been socialising this with events. We invite people door to door sometimes, invite people to these events, and they say, "Yeah, we'll come along. We'll have a casual drink." And during that conversation, like, "Well, did you know anything about this? Do you know anything about that? Or do you know about digital?" And you think, "Well, actually, no. But we know these guys who do, and we that's the way our business works." But at the beginning of the pandemic, all of a sudden we were completely cut off at the knees. We thought, well, hang on a minute. Are we even going to have a business? We do a wires-only broadband service to offices, and the offices are all closing. There's a real threat there. But moreover, we couldn't, even if we did have a business, we couldn't go door knocking, we couldn't run events. Nobody wanted the leaflets. If the leaflet came through, even if they were there to read the leaflet, it'd be sterilised, and nobody wants the leaflets. So we were sort of thinking, well, where do we go and find these customers? We need to go and find them where they are. Where are they working? They're working from home. So we launched a business called Fibrehop, which I don't know if anyone has heard of. It's been an interesting journey. But we launched it in Milton Keynes. And the big reason for launching Milton Keynes was that some time ago, every time we were talking to people in Bristol about technology and innovation, they would say, "Oh, we're going to go to this really cool thing," and then they'd end up in Milton Keynes. And every time the computer science department head says to me, "Look, can you sponsor a trip somewhere?" It was Bletchley Park. It's like there's this whole thing. So it's been an ongoing relationship we've had, and with a number of our tech partners here in the area as well. So we launched this consumer brand thinking, well, actually, this is going to be really great, because what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to provide a home working solution and apply a lot of the logic that you would apply if you're in business. The network is ultimately no different, the business network and the consumer network. And CityFibre have built across the city and all this kind of stuff. I say city, I know there's some, but I've been told that you guys are, Milton Keynes is a city, right? And so we launched it. We thought we were really optimistic, and that's part of our kind of approach, I suppose, is to be very optimistic and very, very, very engaged. But it was really, really difficult. We realised all of a sudden that these business partners we'd had, these business customers, we'd been able to speak to them before engaging as a provider, during, after. There was a relationship, and that relationship was really important. But now we were trying to work out, well, hang on, we can't do that at scale. You can't do it, the margins aren't there to start with, but you can't do that at scale. So how do you communicate with people that are so vastly different to each other? Well, we want to go and see them as they were businesses, but they're not. On the one hand, somebody wants transparency, so we give them information about, contention ratios and various other things. And on the other hand, someone says, look, I don't care, I just want a decent broadband connection, and, stop talking to me about technology I don't understand. So we found that really, really, really difficult. And we realised that we had to keep service almost at arm's length and actually innovate our way to being able to speak to people in the right way. That was not easy at all. Oh. But there is some good news, of course, which is that all of a sudden we had, so I have some notes here, and I've done too many notes. I've done way too many notes. It's like me to do that. So there was some good news. So of course, what happened along the way, of course, is that people were able to use technologies, whether it be to communicate with a family member that was miles away, whether it be to communicate with colleagues or whatever. The homework and homeschooling thing. Even my 6-year-old daughter was logging on and doing all that herself because we were working, but she'd be logging on. We'd have video calls later on with the teachers, and they'd say, well, she clearly wasn't doing any work, but I suppose that's all right. To be accepted. But what happened also was digital transformation kicked in. The digital transformation we've been talking about for years and years and years and trying to help people to understand. All of a sudden, it was at home. That all of the technologies that, I say all the technologies, of course they accelerated beyond that, but a lot of the technologies that the businesses weren't using, particularly with things like video calling, they were all of a sudden very, very confident with. People were very, very confident with being able to quickly log on to something. It's a quick Teams call. I mean, it almost feels weird now to have a telephone call with someone. In fact, I was driving the other day and someone had a Teams call with somebody whilst driving. I was thinking, what? It's one person. I thought I might as well just call you. This is ridiculous. But it seems to be such a default now. And of course, that created this environment that for particularly the small businesses was no longer they were no longer so fearful of what was coming down the line. So it almost created an environment where people could then innovate and be agile and try new things because this technology wasn't so scary anymore. But we still believe that what we needed to do was to socialise that. Well, of course, now we're the other side of it, I think. We've got to think now how we're going to approach our business relationships now. And for me, I personally don't want to lose those close relationships. I think a lot of innovation happens when you're just having a relaxed drink with somebody, when you're just chatting informally, or the networking today, for example, great example of that. So, personally, I don't want to lose that. But we've got this juxtaposition with the great elements that have come out of our experiences in the pandemic versus the stuff that we miss and miss this kind of thing. And one of those, of course, is pressure to be sustainable. And this is no more, or less the case than at the beginning of the pandemic, when all of a sudden we've got the windows open, sat at the front of the house, hearing the birds song, enjoying that and thinking, like, we've not heard that before. But as soon as, certainly of particularly last few months, everything's come back. The lorries flying down the side, the roads by me, the clattering noises and all that kind of stuff. And we miss a lot of that. But the nature of sustainability and the kind of awareness of it has increased exponentially. And I think that's really important. And I think we've all got a desire to keep that going. And we don't want to, we want to make sure we've embraced that. And we want to be better businesses, and we want to improve. And that does mean fundamentally that sometimes we will not go and drive to somebody's office. Now there's a standard. It's like, well, look, guys, why would you drive 3 hours to come and see me for a couple of hours? Of course you wouldn't. You'd have a Teams call. Someone referred to the long lunches. They said of the 80s, but it's really difficult to have that conversation. Long lunches in the 80s. I wasn't working in the 80s, but I was speaking to my dad the other day, and he said, business is really difficult now, isn't it? Like, it's really complicated, and everything's got to be done. And he said in the 80s he was working in IT in London, and he'd just go and have a few beers whenever he felt like it, and they'd have those long lunches and all that kind of stuff. And so I sort of feel like that's the bit that's missing, is that we've got this drive for efficiency, but we're missing those really good social interactions that we have. So it's part of the reason why, really, we're so supportive of this event today, because this is a perfect example of it. So of course, video calling is here to stay, right? We're doing it all the time now. I had a friend who used to FaceTime me all the time, and I'd find it really, really odd. And now it's perfectly normal. It's quite strange. Yeah. I think he was slightly narcissistic, actually. But actually, if this is on video, I better not share that publicly, because you may not appreciate it. And of course, the consumption of internet bandwidth is somewhat increased. Now, this was an interesting one because we had a debate within the company. It was maybe a couple of weeks ago. And Bill Gates' point about moving to the metaverse in 3 years or meetings, I think is actually really, really interesting because I just couldn't get my head around it. The cost of equipment, I mean, 3 years isn't a long time anyway. But Stuart and some of the other sort of younger members of the team, not that that's an issue, but it was the younger members of the team, as it happens, were saying, no, this is really cool, this is really interesting. And I think Bernard Mara's talking about that later, which would be cool. But I do think that creates that disconnect, and I think so we've got to start making decisions, I think, about how that fits together. Not least of all, do you know what? I'm not even sure why I'm looking up there. I've got this here. Not least of all because it's very apparent that people still want those personal connections. And it's not just a home thing. You know, we're not just talking about catching up with granny so she can see the kids grow up visually as well as, you know, being on the phone with them. And you know what kids are like on the phone. They're pretty well poor. But it's clear that the work-life balance needs personal connections, and some of the more enjoyable times we had throughout the lockdown. So I feel very negative. Continue to speak about the pandemic and lockdowns, but I think it's a positive. But Stuart, for example, joined us in that time, and another couple of people as well. And it was just really great meeting people. And we were joking on our table earlier that, like, I get it, I'm quite short, right? But a lot of people, we both had the same thing, we're both quite short. 5'6" 3/4, I think is probably, yeah. But we were joking about the fact that the people that we saw after being on video calls with them, they sort of felt like celebrities. You know, you meet them and you go, oh, I don't know what to say. This is really weird. I'm face to face with you, and so on and so forth. And we were joking that some people look taller and shorter online. And I definitely look taller online than I'm, given the comments of, oh, you're shorter in person. I don't know why I was telling you that story, but yeah. So the personal connections were. Aren't just the work ones, it's those kind of social interactions as well. And given our business was entirely dependent on events and seeing people face to face and networking and whatever else, it has been quite a journey, challenging that. But the net result for us operationally, as an ISP, if anyone sort of knows the context of a layer 2 ISP, you know that you're bolting bits of string together basically and fixing things together, pipes and whatnot. We saw an exponential rise in the amount of bandwidth that was being used across the network. And actually, weirdly, the shared networks, so the way that these networks are built by the likes of CityFibre and others, they are shared networks. So you get big bandwidth when you need it, but you get not a lot if everyone's trying to use it, right, ultimately. I'm sure that's a bit of a given for you guys. But we saw this exponential rise in bandwidth, and not just from one person to the other, but all of a sudden things like speed test servers were being hammered, because if somebody was trying to do something and there's like 15 things going on at the same time, they would then default. And if you remember where Facebook fell over, that particular weekend, we had just the hugest amount of complaints and problems, because what had happened was they said, well, Facebook, it can't possibly be Facebook that's broken. So every man and their dog was doing speed test, and of course they were asymmetric because of the nature of speed test servers and the nature of bandwidth. But all of a sudden everyone was like, well, this is terrible, I'm only getting 400. And a bit of an aside, I've actually had people at home say, I'm only getting 880 meg. You said I'd get 900, which is just obscure. But there aren't platforms on the planet that can, well, there are, but not that you would use in a reasonable context. But the bandwidth usage shot up through the roof. Everyone was using more. And we would see all of a sudden on our monitors this flatlining. And we're talking like 110 gig, ports wherever they are happen to be. And you think, wow, that's like the usage is through the roof. But also the dependency on connectivity. This isn't just about, how much we're using, but actually how dependent we've become on it, become with it. Now it's smart tech, it was running everyone's alarm systems, and people are going on holiday and then the connection goes down for a couple of hours and they go, wow, I can't use anything at all. My entire business life, because I work from home, is down and I'm really important. I'm kind of this role in this company. And so the dependency becomes actually the biggest problem, because now we're trying to build these relationships. You haven't got you need this to scale that. You can't have those direct relationships, but you can only mitigate brand damage by having direct relationships. So there is a real risk there that the two are in conflict. But also this means that connectivity in the workplace needs to be better. A lot of people have decided that they would now no longer invest in property, and they would now think, okay, well, let's get connectivity for our home users. And the challenge that CityFibre has brought to the table, which I think is really important. I sound like a CityFibre employee, I know, but I'm not, I promise. There's a challenge that CityFibre brought to the table, which is to challenge the incumbents, to challenge Openreach, to challenge Virgin, and say, look, I'm going to have your lunch if you don't get on this. The result is that they've actually done a really good job of starting to roll stuff out as well. And interestingly, Milton Keynes seems to be connected from every provider and pretty much everywhere. So that in itself has a lot of competition, but actually that challenge is really good. That's where costs come down and standards go up, and that's really, really important. But people are going to expect to have good connections at home and, of course, in the office. So what are we doing as a sector to rise up? I suppose this is where the sales pitch comes in. So what are we doing as a sector to kind of rise up and meet those needs? And well, the infrastructure is in, right? The infrastructure is in, and where it's not, it's being built. What we've now got to do is really kind of harness that and support businesses to understand it. But most importantly, the competition element has driven some really good behaviours from these providers, and what it's done is support IT companies. I mean, we don't sell directly to businesses. We sell to IT companies who sell to their customers. But it's given them the capability to have a much better level of support. Going back to the voice over IP days and remembering that with this copper mess constantly letting everyone down, and now we've got some really great connectivity. It means IT companies and solution providers and property business and whatever else can start to do some really cool stuff, and they don't feel limited by by the connectivity and the reliability of it, I suppose, is the most important thing. But ultimately, the coolest thing happening this year or these next few years is a copper switch off, and that sounds really dull. And I talked earlier about the idea of legalising copper theft, because if we could do that, they genuinely would change the market. But actually, the exchange closure program, I was with one of the directors at BT Wholesale a few weeks back, and we were talking about the exchange closure program. And I had a different agenda, which was that the current BT exchange in my town is right near my house. And I was thinking it would be quite a cool office and a little bit of a sort of mini data centre or something. But they're closing down a lot of exchanges. They're reducing that copper footprint rapidly. And that's going to make a huge difference, because in actual fact, it's got to be a drive of something fundamental that allows us to then innovate off the top, off the back of that. But also, it's setting the scene for the smaller businesses to say, actually, you know what, we understand this. We're now going to get great connectivity. Years ago, there was a company who was saying to me that they weren't sure what they were going to do broadband-wise and this kind of stuff. But when he got something much more substantial, all of a sudden, he was able to win business from the States and from elsewhere, because he was able to do stuff that he wasn't able to do before. He was able to do amends to a video company, video production company. They were able to do amends to a video almost on the fly. In fact, pretty much that way. And you think, trying to even imagine somebody trying to send a video file now and waiting for 27 hours for it to arrive is just beyond even comprehension. And that's because over the last few years we've moved on. So only a couple of last slides. Sorry, I do tend to go on about these things. So the impact of this is going to be huge. So once that copper's gone, the impact of that is huge, and we've got a network then for 100 years. And all of the providers are on a bit of a land grab. So we are making this happen now for the businesses, particularly the smaller businesses. The key thing for me, though, and why we're here, is that Milton Keynes has been at the front of a lot of this for a long time now. Long time. I say a long time, like almost a decade, right? This is like, this connectivity rollout has begun some time ago. But Milton Keynes been at the forefront of it. And I suppose my point is that we're going to try and support small businesses to innovate. They are agile. They are going to drive innovation. We want to do that in a kind of social context, but it needs to be underpinned by world-class infrastructure. That's a fact. And being that Milton Keynes is the first place across the country to be signed off as being complete for that provider, but also still on the rise with other providers as well, it strikes me that Milton Keynes is a great place for some of those businesses to thrive in. Yeah, I just had a last slide because I just want to press that point. I think we should get back to those long lunches. Anyway, that's me. Thank you for listening.